I almost didn't come that night. Family dinners with my husband's side of the family always had a way of turning into quiet tests, small things people noticed but never said out loud. The way I dressed, the way my kids spoke, the way our lives didn't quite match the polished version everyone else seemed to present. Still, it was my mother-in-law's birthday dinner, and my husband was working late. I brought the kids anyway. The restaurant was the kind of place that tried very hard to look effortless. Soft lighting, polished glasses, the faint smell of herbs, and butter drifting from the kitchen. The tables were spaced far apart, the kind of spacing that suggests people there expect privacy. My two kids noticed the little details immediately, whispering about the candles, the folded napkins, the tall windows looking out onto the street. They weren't screaming. They weren't running around. They were just being children. I kept reminding them softly to stay close, to use their indoor voices, to sit still while the adults talked. Across the table, my sister-in-law Claire watched them with a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the kind of person who carried herself like the room naturally belonged to her. Perfect posture, perfectly chosen words, perfectly timed sighs. For a while, she just observed. Then my youngest knocked his spoon against his glass by accident, a small sound, barely louder than the quiet music in the background. Claire set her fork down. "You and your loud kids need to leave," she said suddenly, loud enough that the next table looked over. The words hung there for a second, heavier than they should have been. My oldest froze. My youngest looked confused, his small hand still resting on the table. Before I could say anything, my mother-in-law gave a small smirk and leaned back in her chair. "This is a fancy restaurant," she said calmly, almost amused. "Not a playground." It wasn't shouted. It was worse than that. It was said with the kind of quiet certainty that assumes everyone will agree. For a moment, I felt that familiar heat rise behind my eyes, the kind that comes when humiliation arrives faster than your thoughts can catch it. Other diners were definitely looking now. Claire folded her arms, clearly satisfied that the problem had been addressed. I could have argued. I could have defended my kids. I could have packed up and walked out. Instead, I did what I've learned to do in moments like that. I paused. My daughter looked at me carefully, trying to read my face. "It's okay." I told her quietly, "Finish your bread." But the moment had already spread beyond our table. A shadow appeared beside us. At first, I thought it was a server coming to smooth things over. That's usually how these situations go. Someone politely asking the loud party to step outside. The man standing there wasn't carrying a tray. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a calm expression and a dark apron tied neatly at his waist. The kind of person who moved slowly, like someone used to being listened to. He looked at the table, then at my children. Claire immediately shifted into polite mode. "We're so sorry," she said lightly. "We were just explaining that this isn't really the place for—" The man raised his hand slightly, not rudely, just enough to pause her sentence. "Actually," he said, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the table with quiet clarity. "These kids will always belong here." The silence that followed felt different from the one before. Claire blinked. My mother-in-law frowned slightly, as if trying to understand the sentence. The man turned to my children and gave them a small smile. "I remember when you two were barely tall enough to see over the counter," he said. My youngest's face lit up instantly. "Mr. Hassan," he said, almost jumping out of his chair. Now the confusion at the table was complete. Mr. Hassan rested a hand lightly on the back of my son's chair. "Your mother used to bring you here every Sunday morning," he continued, looking at Claire and my mother-in-law now, "back when this place was still half empty and we were struggling to stay open." No one spoke. He continued calmly. "She helped us design the kids' brunch menu, tested recipes with her own children, sitting right there in the kitchen." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the restaurant. "And when we couldn't afford proper marketing, she told every parent in the neighborhood about us." I felt my ears grow warm. This was not a conversation I expected to be happening in front of my in-laws. Mr. Hassan's voice stayed steady. Families kept this place alive in the early years, he said. Especially families with children. He looked down at my kids again. So no, he added gently, they're not out of place here. Then he glanced at Claire and my mother-in-law, not accusing, not dramatic, just matter of fact. They've been part of this restaurant longer than most of our regulars. The shift at the table was immediate. Claire's arms slowly uncrossed. My mother-in-law's smirk disappeared, replaced by a tight, uncertain expression. Around us, the other diners had already returned to their conversations. The scene that had briefly existed was dissolving. Mr. Hassan gave my daughter a small nod. "Enjoy your dinner," he said. Then he walked away. No applause, no dramatic moment, just quiet footsteps disappearing back toward the kitchen. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Claire picked up her fork again, though she didn't immediately start eating. My mother-in-law adjusted her napkin. The energy at the table had changed in a way no one could easily undo. My kids went back to eating their bread. Eventually, Claire cleared her throat. "Well," she said carefully, "I didn't realize." I didn't respond, not because I wanted the last word, but because the moment had already said everything that needed saying. Dinner continued after that, quieter than before. Not hostile, exactly. Just different. And when we finally stood up to leave, my daughter squeezed my hand. "Mom," she whispered, "really do belong here." I smiled at her. "Yes," I said. For once, I didn't feel the need to prove it.